The moment I realized my daughter had built an entire new life without me was the same moment I learned I was about to inherit $12 million. It was a secret I had carried alone for years, hidden beneath a quiet, ordinary life no one ever questioned. But when Emily got married and didn't even think to tell me until the very last minute, when I sat in the back row of her wedding like a stranger, it changed something inside me. Not out of anger, but out of a painful understanding. She saw me as someone small, someone forgettable, someone who had nothing to offer. She had no idea that the father she overlooked was sitting on a fortune big enough to change her future forever. And I wasn't sure anymore whether revealing that truth would heal our broken relationship or destroy whatever little we had left. This is not a story about money. It's a story about distance, the kind that grows slowly between parents and children until one day you realize you barely recognize each other. It's about pride, mistakes, silence, and the unexpected ways life forces us to confront the people we love. Today I'm going to take you inside the moment everything changed. The moment I had to decide whether to keep the inheritance hidden or use it to rebuild the bond between me and my daughter. Because when life hands you a secret powerful enough to rewrite your entire family story, the hardest part isn't the money. It's choosing what kind of person you're going to be when the truth finally comes out. Some stories don't break open with dramatic shouts or slammed doors. Some drift apart quietly, like a rope slowly fraying fiber by fiber until one day you realize nothing is holding it together anymore. That's how it happened between Emily and me. Not a single moment of explosion, not a single argument that tore us down, but a slow, painful distancing over years. One that neither of us truly noticed until it was too late. Emily was my only child. Her mother passed away when she was just 6, leaving the two of us to navigate life with a grief we didn't know how to explain. For years it was just us against the world. I packed her lunches, braided her hair poorly, helped with school projects, and showed up for every recital, even when I had stacks of papers waiting to be graded. Being a public school teacher didn't leave me with much, but whatever I had I gave to her. But things changed as she grew older. In our modest American suburb, where lawns were mowed once a week and neighbors waved from their driveways, Emily began comparing herself to the kids who lived 2 streets over. Kids with bigger houses, newer bikes, and parents who took them on summer trips to Disneyland or Florida. I saw the shift in her eyes long before she spoke it. A quiet discomfort, a shrinking pride, a sense that our life was less. It started small. Neutral comments like, "Dad, Lily's family is going to Hawaii again." Or, "Everyone has brand new sneakers this year." I'd smile and say something comforting, but inside I felt a sting I couldn't express. I wanted to give her the world. But the world was too expensive for a schoolteacher's salary. By high school, she had learned to hide her embarrassment behind silence. She didn't ask me to drop her off at the front of the school anymore. She asked for $20 more often, but without the joy she used to have when buying small childhood treats. Now it was necessity, appearance, the need to fit in. I wasn't angry at her for that. She was just trying to survive the ruthless social jungle of teenage years. But I did feel the distance. She talked less, laughed less, and the girl who once sat cross-legged on my bed telling me about her day now closed her bedroom door more often. College took her far away, New York, a different life, a different world. She called often during the first semester, but by the second year, weeks would pass without a single text. I told myself she was busy, she was studying, she was building her future, but the truth was harder. She didn't need me the way she once did. The day she brought Daniel home for the first time, I understood a new kind of distance, one that wasn't accidental but structural. He wore a tailored blazer and one of those watches that cost more than 3 months of my salary. His shoes looked shinier than my car bumper. He shook my hand politely, but his eyes scanned my home, my furniture, my life with thinly veiled judgment. "So this is where Emily grew up?" he said with a smile that wasn't a smile. "Yes," I replied simply. He nodded, but the look in his eyes said the rest. She deserves more than this. And maybe she did, but the unspoken comparison stung in a way I didn't let show. Conversations during dinner that night drifted into topics I didn't belong in: investment portfolios, office politics, rooftop bars, international travel. I sat there quietly, pushing small pieces of food around my plate, feeling older and smaller with each passing minute. Emily didn't notice. Or maybe she did, but didn't know how to bridge the gap. She was proud of the life she had carved. And I was proud of her too, but pride doesn't erase loneliness. When the wedding planning began, she seemed swept up in a whirlwind of aesthetics, venues, menus, photographers with European accents charging prices that made my head spin. I tried to be supportive, even though every meeting felt like stepping into a world where my presence was almost awkward. Then came the wedding day. I showed up in the best suit I owned, one I had worn to teacher banquets 15 years earlier. I sat in the back, not because I preferred it, but because no seat had been marked for the father of the bride. Guests who barely knew her sat closer to the aisle than I did. When she walked down that aisle in her beautiful white dress, she looked radiant, glowing, and yet she didn't look toward me. Not once. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, on a future where I was merely part of the background. I clapped when everyone else did. I smiled when the ceremony ended, but inside something fragile cracked. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't anger. It was a realization. She had stepped into a life where I didn't fit, not because she rejected me outright, but because we had evolved into two people living in two parallel worlds that no longer intersected. The weeks after the wedding were quiet. She didn't call. Not to check on me. Not to talk about her new home. Not to ask how I was adjusting to the silence of an empty house. I would look at my phone sometimes, wondering if she'd changed her number, or had simply changed her priorities. Yet even then, despite the ache, the disappointment, the growing fear that I had lost her for good, I still loved her fiercely, and that love, tired, bruised but unbroken, waited, silently, patiently, because sometimes a rift doesn't mean the end. Sometimes it's just the painful beginning of a story waiting to be repaired. A story that neither of us knew fate was about to reopen in the most unexpected way. If this meets your expectations, I'll continue with. Some moments arrive so quietly that you don't realize everything has changed until after. The air has shifted. The day the inheritance letter came was one of those moments, an ordinary morning wrapped around an extraordinary truth. I was standing in my small kitchen, pouring myself a cup of black coffee, when I heard the soft thump of mail hitting the doorstep. Nothing unusual. I opened the door expecting bills, grocery coupons, maybe a charity flyer. Instead, among the stack was a plain white envelope with my name printed neatly. Across the front, Arthur James Miller. No return address. No markings. Nothing to hint at how drastically it would alter my life. I sat down at the table, adjusted my reading glasses, and opened it slowly. The letter inside was printed on thick cream paper, the kind only lawyers and corporate offices use. I began reading, expecting some generic notice or a scam. But then I saw the name. Jacob Whitmore. My uncle, a man I barely knew. Someone who drifted out of my childhood like smoke. Here one Thanksgiving. Gone the next year, never to return. My father rarely spoke of him, except to mutter something about differences and choices. Families have old wounds. Some heal, some scar, some are forgotten on purpose. Uncle Jacob was part of the forgotten kind. Still, his name startled me, and the next line nearly stopped my heart. You have been named the sole heir to his estate. I blinked, reading further. Valued at an estimated $12 million. My first reaction wasn't joy, or disbelief. It was numbness, like someone had hit a mute button on the world around me. $12 million? For a retired schoolteacher who counted every discount coupon? It didn't feel real. I reread it 5 times. My eyes kept returning to the number, refusing to believe the commas were in the right place. 12 million. I leaned back in my chair, the old wood creaking under my weight. My coffee sat untouched, steam fading into the air. All sitting. I heard was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of my own heartbeat. How could a man who vanished from our lives leave me everything he owned? Why me? Why not Charity? Why not a distant friend? Why not anyone else? The letter offered no explanation. Only details about accounts, real estate, legal contacts, and transfer procedures. Cold, factual, emotionless. But I felt the weight of it like a boulder had been dropped in my lap. I wasn't a wealthy man. Never had been. My life had been predictable, routine, built on paychecks and modest hopes. I had spent years teaching kids algebra, breaking up hallway fights, keeping my head above water, and suddenly a fortune was sitting in a file folder. But here's the truth about unexpected wealth. It doesn't immediately feel like a blessing. It feels like a secret, a dangerous one. I folded the letter and placed it neatly back into its envelope, my hands trembling slightly. My mind raced, not with fantasies of mansions or yachts, but with fear. Fear of what this money could change. Money doesn't just alter lifestyles. It exposes people. It reveals the cracks in relationships, the quiet greed in hearts, the unspoken expectations people hide. I had seen it happen with friends. Inheritances tearing siblings apart. Cousins suing each other. Children turning cold toward their parents. And then there was Emily, my daughter, who had married into a world where money wasn't just useful. It was a language, a status, a safety net. She had never asked me for anything extravagant, but I always sensed she wished life had offered her more. If she knew about this inheritance, would she look at me differently? Would Daniel? Would they see me as a blessing or a bank? I wasn't ready to find out. So I made a decision that felt both protective and painfully heavy. I told no one. Not a friend. Not a neighbor. Not Emily. I went on living exactly as before. Same worn sneakers. Same grocery store. Same old Ford truck that groaned every winter morning. I even clipped coupons the next day out of habit. Something about pretending everything was the same made it easier to breathe. But the money was real, very real, and every time I opened my desk drawer and saw the official folder, it reminded me that I was carrying a truth bigger than anything I'd ever held. Weeks passed. I began working with the estate lawyer, filling out forms, transferring assets quietly. I kept the funds in a private account under legal trust. No movement. No spending. I didn't know what to do with it, not yet. It sat there peacefully, untouched. Like a sleeping giant, I was afraid to poke awake. Then one afternoon, as I trimmed the hedges outside, my phone buzzed. It was a rare call, one that immediately made my stomach tighten. Emily. Her voice was soft, shaken. "Dad, can I come over?" Something in her tone told me everything wasn't fine. She arrived less than half an hour later, stepping out of her car slowly, as if her feet were heavier than usual. When she walked into my living room, she didn't try to smile. She sat down, clasped her hands, and whispered, "Dad, we're in trouble." My heart clenched. She told me everything about the debt, the failed business, the loans they shouldn't have taken. She looked embarrassed, broken, and all I could think was how strange life could be. Here she was drowning, while I had a life raft hidden in a drawer upstairs. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked gently. She looked down. "Because you've done enough for me." I didn't want to be a burden. If only she knew. If only she understood that the last thing she could ever be to me is a burden. I wanted to tell her the truth right then. The money. The inheritance. The miracle sitting untouched. But something stopped me. Not distrust of her, never her, but fear of what the truth would mean. And as she sat there quietly crying, I realized the shock wasn't the $12 million. It was the timing. Life had handed me a secret at the exact moment she needed help, forcing me to choose between protecting her and protecting what little relationship we still had left. If you want, I'll continue with. Secrets have a strange weight to them. You can't hold one in your hands, and yet somehow it presses against your ribs like a stone you've swallowed. After Emily left that afternoon, after she cried in my living room and apologized for things she never needed to apologize for, I walked upstairs to my small study and opened the drawer where the inheritance folder waited. $12 million, my daughter drowning in debt. Two truths sitting side by side, both demanding something from me. I sat down slowly, the folder open in front of me, and whispered into the empty room. What am I supposed to do with this? You'd think the answer would be simple. Help her, of course. She's my daughter. Blood of my blood. But life isn't made of simple equations. It's made of histories, of misunderstandings, of old wounds covered by time but not fully healed. And if I handed her that kind of money just like that, what would it do to us? What would it do to her? Money solves problems, yes, but it also reshapes people. I had seen it happen in my own family. Rich cousins who became strangers, siblings who stopped speaking, friends who turned their backs the moment inheritance turned into expectations. I didn't want that for Emily. I didn't want to see a different look in her eyes when she talked to me. Not because she loved me, but because she needed something from me. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly, the shadows sliding across the room. I kept hearing Emily's voice. We're in trouble. There's a specific kind of pain a parent feels when their child is hurting. Even if that child is grown, the world might see them as adults, capable and strong, but to you, they're still the kid you carried when they scraped a knee or cried because they lost a toy. You never stop wanting to protect them. Around 2 in the morning, I got up, made myself a cup of warm milk, an old habit, and sat at the kitchen table. The house was dark except for the soft yellow glow of the stove light. I ran my hand over the table, remembering all the evenings Emily did her homework there. Back then, my biggest worry was whether she'd understand fractions. Now she was facing a mountain of debt, and I was sitting on a fortune I hadn't earned. The guilt started to gnaw at me. The next day I invited her and Daniel over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just baked chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Comfort food. When they arrived, I noticed immediately that Daniel looked tired, not physically, something deeper. A kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying too many secrets and not enough hope. We sat down to eat. Conversation was polite at first. Shallow. Weather. Work. Neighbors. The kind of talk you use to avoid the real thing. But eventually the air shifted and Daniel quietly said, "We're exploring our options. Bankruptcy being one." Emily dropped her gaze, ashamed. I felt something twist sharply inside me. "Why didn't you come to me earlier?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We didn't want to disappoint you," Emily whispered. Disappoint me? They could never disappoint me. But that's the curse of being a parent. You rarely see yourself the way your children see you. After they left that night, I stood at the doorway watching their car pull away. Headlights sliding down the street, turning the corner, disappearing. The house fell silent again. I walked back inside, closed the door, and leaned against it with my eyes shut. I knew I couldn't keep the secret forever. But I also knew I couldn't just drop the truth on them with no preparation. It would feel like an earthquake, shaking. The foundations of everything. They knew about me, about their own lives, about their future. So I made a decision, a quiet one, a heavy one. I would help them, but they would never know where the help came from. The next day, I called a financial advisor, someone recommended by the estate lawyer, someone bound by confidentiality. We talked options, anonymous payments, private trusts, indirect debt relief, legal pathways that would allow me to help without revealing anything. It felt sneaky, deceptive, a lie wrapped up as kindness. But it also felt right. I wasn't protecting the money. I was protecting my family from the harm money could do. Later that week, Emily stopped by unexpectedly. She said she'd been thinking, and she didn't want debt to define her marriage or her life anymore. She was considering getting a second job, cutting expenses, selling her car, doing whatever it took. She was fighting, trying, hurting quietly but refusing to break. I felt a swell of pride so strong it nearly cracked me open. And that's when I realized something. If I gave her the money openly, I would be robbing her of this strength, this resilience she was building day by day. I would be stealing her victory before she had a chance to earn it. But if I helped quietly, if I reduced the burden without her knowing, then she could still rise, still overcome, still be proud of the life she rebuilt. So I made arrangements. Slow, careful, legally clean. Debt consolidation done through a third-party trust. Anonymous payments applied in structured phases to avoid suspicion. And all the while, Emily believed she was making progress on her own, because she was. But the secret remained. The inheritance stayed buried, and I carried its weight every day like a stone in my chest. Some secrets are told to protect others. Some are told to protect yourself. But the hardest ones are the ones you keep because love demands it. And love, real love, is rarely simple. If you want the next chapter, just say, there are moments in life when a person quietly turns a corner. No big announcement. No dramatic music. Just a subtle shift like the way morning light slowly pushes away the night. For Emily, that shift began on an ordinary Tuesday, weeks after she confessed the truth about her debt. But what changed wasn't her situation. It was her. It started with a phone call. She called me around 6 in the evening. I recognized her voice immediately, but it was different. Calmer, more grounded. "Dad, can we talk?" she asked. Of course, I said, trying not to let my worry show. When she arrived, she wasn't frantic or emotional the way she'd been before. She sat on the couch, took a deep breath, and said, "I think I finally understand something." I didn't speak. I knew she wasn't done. I've spent so many years trying to look strong, trying to prove I could live up to everyone's expectations. But I think I forgot what really matters. There was no bitterness in her tone, no helplessness, just clarity. She told me she'd spent the past few weeks reevaluating everything. Her marriage, her job, her priorities. She'd stopped seeing herself as a victim of circumstance and started questioning the choices she made along the way. And even more surprising, she said she wanted to fix her life not because she had to, but because she wanted to. I'm tired of being afraid, she said softly. I'm tired of pretending everything is okay. Her honesty struck me in a way I wasn't prepared for. For the first time in a long time, I was seeing the child I raised, the girl who used to climb trees, who used to dream out loud, who believed she could take on the world. She hadn't disappeared. She had simply forgotten herself along the way. I listened as she talked about boundaries she needed to set with people, friends, coworkers, even with Daniel. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. She wanted to build a life grounded in responsibility and self-worth, not pressure and perfection. I think I blamed too many people for things that were partly my fault, she admitted. But that means I can change it. I can fix it. That sentence alone, I can fix it, was more powerful than anything money could ever buy. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched her evolve. She picked up a part-time job at a local community center, not because she was desperate, but because she wanted structure. She created a budgeting plan, cut down unnecessary expenses, and started attending evening workshops on financial management. But the biggest change was in the way she carried herself. She stood taller, spoke more confidently, listened more openly. She wasn't looking for rescue anymore. She was building herself back up. One evening, she came over with takeout and said she wanted to tell me something. Kind of big. She sat down, straightened her shoulders, and said, I think I owe you an apology. A real one. Not for the debt, but for the distance. Those words pierced straight through me. She explained that for years she'd assumed I judged her, expected more from her, wanted her life to look a certain way. But the truth was she had projected her own fears onto me. And in doing so, she had drifted farther and farther away. I thought you were disappointed in me, she whispered. But I realize now, I was disappointed in myself. For a moment, the room was completely still. I felt my eyes burn, and before I could stop myself, I reached for her hand. Em, I said, I've never been disappointed in you. Not once. Her face crumbled, not in sadness, but in relief. She leaned against me the way she used to when she was a little girl. And for the first time in years, I felt her trust fully return. And yet, the secret sat inside me like a locked box. She didn't know about the trust payments quietly chipping away at her debt. She didn't know I was helping behind the scenes. She didn't know a $12 million inheritance existed. I wondered whether her change would continue once she discovered the truth. Would she still feel proud of herself if she learned she wasn't doing it alone, or would it shatter her progress, undo all the strength she'd been building? Those questions haunted me every night. One weekend, Emily invited me to join her and Daniel for dinner at their apartment. It was small but filled with warmth, string lights, framed photos, a diffuser humming quietly in the corner. They cooked a simple meal and laughed more than I'd heard them laugh in months. During dessert, Emily said something that struck me deeply. I think life started making sense. When I stopped waiting for things to get easier, she had accepted responsibility. She had stopped running. She had found her footing again, and I felt the weight of my secret grow heavier. I wanted to tell her everything, got how I wanted to, but I couldn't bring myself to take away the identity she was reclaiming. I couldn't risk making her feel small again, not after she had fought so hard to feel strong. Her change of heart wasn't just about finances. It was about healing, about letting go of old wounds, about rediscovering the connection between us. In many ways, she had already become the woman I always hoped she'd be. But she became it without knowing the truth I carried. And that truth, no matter how noble my intentions were, was a ticking clock. Because secrets don't stay buried forever. And the day she found out, everything, her trust, her strength, her progress, would be put to the ultimate test. It's strange how numbers can look so harmless on paper. You write them down, 1200010, and they behave, sitting politely on the page. But in reality, those numbers have teeth. $12 million isn't just money. It's possibility. It's pressure. It's temptation. And when held in secret, it becomes a storm. For weeks I carried the decision quietly, like a pocket stone I kept turning over in my hand. Every day I told myself I would decide tomorrow. Every night I told myself I needed more time. The truth was, I wasn't avoiding the decision. I was terrified of it. You don't get handed $12 million without consequences, and you don't give away $12 million without changing something fundamental in the person receiving it. What would it do to Emily? What would it do to Daniel? What would it do to us? The estate lawyer called me one morning to go over updates on the trust. His voice was professional, clinical, but behind every sentence I felt a silent question. Have you thought about what you plan to do long term? Long term. Those two words felt heavier than the money itself. After the call, I took a long drive through the outskirts of town. The kind of drive where you roll down the windows and let the cold air sting your face just to feel something clear. The leaves were beginning to turn orange and red. The sky was bright and the roads were nearly empty. I pulled into a quiet overlook, killed the engine, and just sat there, listening to nothing but the wind brushing through the trees. I tried to imagine a world where I did tell Emily. What would happen? Would she be grateful? Would she be shocked? Would she feel betrayed that I'd kept it hidden? Would she start relying on me financially? Would she worry the money was conditional? Or worse, would the money create distance again, undoing every inch of progress we fought so hard to rebuild? I thought of the girl Emily used to be, fearless, stubborn, hungry for life. The girl who grew into a woman who stumbled and broke but learned to stand up again. These past months, did I have a right to interfere with that growth? When I finally drove home, I walked straight into the study and took out the inheritance folder. I stared at the bold numbers printed on the page. I had never asked for this money. I had never wanted it. My late brother left it to me because he trusted me, trusted my judgment, my humility, my ability to do the right thing. But what was the right thing? That night I invited Emily for coffee. Nothing dramatic. No heavy topics planned. Just a father wanting to be near his daughter. We sat by the window of a small cafe downtown, the kind that smelled like cinnamon and roasted beans. She talked about work, about a small victory she had at the community center, about how she and Daniel were finally working as a team instead of tiptoeing around their problems. Her smile was real. Her eyes were clear. She was steadying herself, and as I watched her stir sugar into her coffee, I realized something heartbreaking and beautiful. She didn't need saving anymore. She needed freedom. That realization hit me like a punch. Maybe the inheritance wasn't meant to fix Emily's life. Maybe it was simply meant to ensure she would never again fall so far that she couldn't get back up. Maybe it was meant to be a foundation, not a rescue. But foundations don't sit in secret forever. Later that night, alone in my quiet house, I walked from room to room trying to imagine a future where the secret remained hidden. A future where she never knew I had the means to help, never understood my choices, never saw the trust I had in her ability to rise on her own. And for the first time, that future felt wrong. Not because she needed the money. Not because I wanted credit. Not because I felt guilty. But because secrets, no matter how noble, build walls. And Emily and I had spent too many years behind walls. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd once taught her to write her name, and pulled out a stack of blank paper. I began drafting letters, some revealing the inheritance fully, some offering partial truth, some explaining the anonymous debt payments, some saying nothing at all. Each time I tore the letter up, nothing felt right. How do you reveal something that could change a person's entire trajectory? How do you do it without sounding like a benefactor or a judge or a man, trying too hard to fix what wasn't his to fix? I spent hours at that table. At one point, I whispered into the quiet room, what would make her feel loved? Not controlled? It took the rest of the night for the answer to finally appear in my mind, quietly, gently, but with absolute clarity. I couldn't make this decision for Emily. I couldn't assume the money would break her. I couldn't hide the truth forever, pretending I was protecting her. Love isn't protection through secrecy. Love is honesty with compassion. So I made my decision. I would tell her. All of it. The inheritance. The trust. The anonymous payments. The reason I hesitated, the reason I wanted her to stand on her own first, the reason I believed in her strength more than she ever believed in her own. Not to shock her, not to save her, but to offer her what the money truly represented: a choice, a future, a chance to step into a life not built from fear, but from power. But before I could tell her, something happened. Something that forced the truth into the light sooner than I expected. And the reveal, the moment everything came crashing down, was nothing like I imagined. I always imagined that when the moment finally came, when the secret of the $12 million inheritance revealed itself, I would be the one to bring it into the light. I would sit Emily down, look her in the eyes, and tell her everything with the kind of calm, steady honesty a father should have. That was the plan. But life seems to take plans personally. It was late November when it happened. The air had that cold bite that slips down your collar, and the yard was covered in brittle leaves that crackled under my shoes. I was bringing in the mail when I noticed one envelope that didn't match the others. No stamp, no return address, no markings at all. I didn't think much of it. People drop flyers and advertisements all the time. But when I tore it open, something inside me stopped. It was a notice from the financial institution that handled the anonymous trust payments, the trust I'd set up to quietly reduce Emily's debt. The notice said they needed one more piece of documentation, and that for verification purposes, they had sent a duplicate notice to the beneficiary, to Emily, to my daughter. The trust with no name attached. The trust meant to stay invisible. And just like that, the secret was slipping out of my hands. I didn't breathe for a long moment. My kitchen seemed to tilt. The refrigerator hummed louder than usual. The clock ticked like it was mocking me. I grabbed my coat and keys and rushed to the car. The drive to Emily's house felt like a blur of red lights and panicked thoughts. When I reached their place, Daniel opened the door with a stunned look on his face. His eyes were wide, confused, overwhelmed, maybe even a little afraid. "Is she here?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "She's in the living room. She got a letter." My stomach tightened. I stepped inside, and there she was, Emily, standing in the middle of the room, holding the document that was never supposed to reach her hands. Her eyes were glossy, but not from tears, from shock, from realization. She looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. "Dad," she said softly, "what is this?" I didn't speak right away. I couldn't. My throat felt tight, like the words were stuck behind every fear I'd ever carried. So she asked again, louder this time. "Dad, what is this?" I took a slow step toward her. Daniel stayed quiet, leaning against the wall as if unsure whether to step in or step back. Emily held the paper as though it burned. "I was going to tell you," I finally said. "When?" she shot back. "Before or after all my debt magically disappeared without me knowing why." Her words stung, not because they were unkind, but because they were true. "Emily," I whispered, "please sit down." "No," her voice cracked. "I want to hear it standing." And so I told her everything. I told her about the inheritance, how it came from my late brother, how I didn't expect it, how it terrified me. I explained how I couldn't bear to watch her drown when I knew I could, throw her a lifeline. I told her why I kept it hidden, why I chose anonymous payments, why I wanted her to rediscover her strength before money reshaped her life again. She stood still the entire time, not blinking, not moving, just listening. When I finally stopped speaking, the silence was devastating. Her face wasn't angry. It wasn't relieved. It wasn't grateful. It was broken. "Why didn't you trust me with the truth?" she whispered. I felt my heart cave in. "I was trying to protect you," I said. She shook her head slowly, painfully. "No, Dad. You were protecting yourself. From the possibility that I wouldn't react well. From the chance I might depend on you. From the idea that I might disappoint you again." Her words were a knife, but they were honest. And she deserved honesty in return. "You're right," I said. I was scared. That admission hung in the room like smoke. Emily's breath shook. All this time, I thought I was finally getting ahead. I thought I was making progress on my own. I thought I was becoming strong again. "You were," I said immediately. "You still are." "Then why didn't you let me believe in myself?" she whispered. "Why didn't you let me choose?" I stepped closer and gently placed my hand on the document she was holding. "Because I didn't want the money to define you," I said quietly. I wanted you to define you. Her tears finally fell. Daniel stepped forward then, not saying a word, simply placing a hand on her back. It was the first time I saw them fully united, not against each other, not against the world, but in the same storm together. Emily stepped away from me and sat down slowly, her hands shaking. "Dad," she said, her voice softer now, "you should have told me, not because I needed the money, but because I needed to trust you." My own tears blurred my vision. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so deeply sorry." For a long moment, none of us said anything. Then Emily took a deep breath, wiped her face, and said the most surprising thing of all. "I don't want the money. Not right now. Not until I understand what it means. Not until I know I'm ready for the responsibility." Her decision stunned me. She wasn't rejecting the inheritance. She wasn't rejecting me. She was choosing clarity, control, maturity, strength. And for the first time since the secret began, I felt the weight lift because the truth was finally shared, and the choice finally belonged to her. Emily stood up, walked toward me, and wrapped her arms around me with a long, trembling hug. "We'll figure this out," she whispered. "Together. No more secrets." And for the first time in years, I felt like I had my daughter back. In the weeks that followed the reveal, something unexpected happened. Peace. Not the quiet, avoid everything kind of peace, but the honest kind. The kind that settles only after the truth is finally spoken out loud. Emily and I didn't fix everything overnight. We didn't try to. Instead, we talked slowly, carefully, openly. For the first time in years, we were learning each other again, not as father and child locked behind old expectations, but as two adults trying to rebuild something real. The inheritance didn't disappear, and neither did the problems. But the weight of secrecy was gone, and in its place was something far more powerful. Trust. Real trust. The kind you earn only after surviving something that could have broken you. Emily didn't rush her decision about the $12 million. She asked questions, did research, and spoke to professionals. She approached it the same way she approached rebuilding her life, with responsibility, courage, and a clarity she had fought hard to find. And as for me, I finally understood that love doesn't mean shielding someone from every burden. Sometimes, love means telling the truth and standing beside them as they learn to carry it. In the end, the money changed nothing, but honesty changed everything.